Hi, I'm Colin.
And I'm Phil.
We're the hosts of Science Fiction 101.
It's a show which gets to the heart of science fiction. Books, films, TV. We've covered Star Trek,
Doctor Who,
Star Wars.
We love to explore the past, present, and future of science fiction.
And we'd love for you to join us
on Science Fiction 101.
Hi, Colin.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, everybody. This time, we're going to look at that great science fictional pairing of Wallace and Gromit. As I argued in the last episode, Wallace and Gromit is science fiction, and we're going to prove that today by going through the whole back catalogue of Wallace and Gromit. Colin, what's your prior experience of Wallace and Gromit before doing a rewatch for this podcast? What did you know of them?
Well, I have children who are currently in their 20s, which means they were born around the 2000s, of course, if you've done your math. And when they were 4 or 5, we got a Wallace and Gromit DVD that had the 3 classic shorts and the entire set of the cracking contraptions. And they absolutely loved them. They loved them so much that one of my younger son Tim's birthdays was all Wallace and Gromit themed. My wife made a cake that was in the shape of a block of cheese with scoops out of it. I think we did themed games. We did the whole 9 yards.
Fantastic. Because to me, Wallace and Gromit are incredibly, well, I was going to say British, but actually they're incredibly English. And I've always wondered how well they travel around the world. I know they're dubbed into lots of different languages, and I know that the films have been released in the US and have won Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always wondered, what on earth do you make of it? Do you not find it bafflingly foreign?
There was humor. Most humor is truly international, right? Even without a laugh track to cue you when to laugh. But there is one thing that stands out in several of the Wallace and Gromit episodes that I've never understood. And that is dumping things across the border of Yorkshire or trying to escape to the border of Yorkshire. And I was wondering if you might have any insight as to the reason for that. It's
kind of satirical, really. I mean, we have counties in the UK, and traditionally there's been a sort of a rivalry between them. So the great rivalry is Yorkshire and Lancashire, which are 2 counties next to each other. And these days, it's just a bit of fun, really. But they treat it as if crossing from Yorkshire into Lancashire, or vice versa, is going from one country to another. So it's just exaggeration.
Gotcha. So we have to assume that West Wallaby Lane is in Lancashire.
Yes. In one of the earlier films, you see the full address, and it's West Wallaby Lane, Wigan. And Wigan used to be in Lancashire. It's not anymore because they changed all the boundaries of the counties. It's now part of Greater Manchester. But Wigan used to be part of Lancashire. But if that's the only thing that baffled you as a viewer, then that's quite remarkable.
There are some things that have sailed over my head, but it is so funny and so well written that it's quite enjoyable anyway.
Yes. And I think that's the key to it. And I think as we go through the various films, I think all of that will become clear. Maybe we should introduce Wallace and Gromit for the benefit of anyone who's never heard of them, never seen them. I would describe them as a comedy film double act made out of plasticine or clay and hand animated. And they have adventures which are both very mundane and somewhat extraordinary. Wallace is a human being who loves cheese and is an inventor, and Gromit is a dog who doesn't say anything because he's a dog. Does that about cover it, do you think?
Well, and they're very, very faithful and devoted to one another.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Especially on Gromit's side. But I think that'll come out as we begin to talk about the different films and such.
Yeah. So should we talk about the first film then?
Yeah.
Which was called A Grand Day Out from 1989. Actually, there's a Yorkshireism or even a Lancashireism in the title of that, A Grand Day Out. Because grand, I don't know if you know this, in north of England, if you say something's grand, you mean it's great. So, somebody might do you a great favour and you would say grand, and it literally means great. So a grand day out is not grand as in an extensive, amazingly big and lavish day out. It doesn't mean that necessarily. It just means we had a great day the day we went to moon, because that's what they do, isn't it? They go to the moon.
Going to the moon is a great thing to do.
It sure is. Would you like to describe A Grand Day Out, and then perhaps we'll take it in turns of describing the ones that follow?
Yeah. So in the mid 1980s, there's a young man named Nick Park who's going to school, and he is, I guess, one of his hobbies or related to a school project is stop motion animation. And he begins this story about a man and his dog who love cheese and decide that they're going to have a little holiday and go to the moon to have some cheese because obviously the moon is made out of cheese. And this project is so incredible that Aardman Animation snaps him up and allows him to finish the project, and it's published in 1989. And that's how that's how the world is introduced to Wallace and Gromit. Our inventor, Wallace, wants to go to the moon, and so he and his dog Gromit build a rocket ship down in their garage, complete with fuse for lighting to get off on time. And they go to the moon, and they find out that the cheese is quite acceptable. You could just cut off little bits of crater or stalagmites to taste, and finds out that they're not alone on the moon. There is a coin-operated robot guard, that is supposed to stop them from doing this. And the guard chases them around. They get back into the spaceship to leave, and then successfully escape back to the planet Earth.
And, of course, leaving behind the robot vending machine thing. But they also leave behind one of their travel brochures, which is about skiing holidays. And it gives this robotic creature dreams and visions of going skiing. They've actually enriched his life.
Yeah, as they're trying to escape off the moon, the robot's trying to stop them. It grabs the side of a doorway. As the flame from the rocket explodes to take them off the moon, he's blown backward, and he takes parts of the door frame with him, and he straightens it out, and then he's skiing up and down the moon cheese mountains.
As you would.
Yes.
So this was a student project. Nick Park was doing a master's degree at the National Film and Television School, which is our sort of biggest film school in the UK, very prestigious. And lots of very successful filmmakers have come from the National Film and Television School. So this was literally his graduation project. I understand that it was delayed by several years, partly because he went to work for Aardman, but also because it was such a complicated thing to produce. And it was nominated for an Oscar. So not many student film projects are nominated for an Oscar.
No, not commonly. Well, and we should talk a little bit about the incredible intricacy of stop motion, where it's not like filming actors. You have to minutely move everything in frame for every frame. And so the rate of film you can take per day is very, very slow.
Yeah.
In addition to all the model making, all the artistry, you can't just go out and buy a couch. You have to build it out of plasticine or framing or model works or whatever. I'm amazed. And as we talk about the shows, all of the in-gags they put in really reward a second, sometimes a third watching to try and pick them all up.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that's always impressed me the most about them, is the intricacy of all the props and the backgrounds and things like that. So in this first one, I seem to recall we see things like Gromit using a hand drill and maybe a riveting gun or something like that to build the spaceship. And all of those have to be made. So when you see him holding up a drill and pulling the trigger and the end of the drill spinning, every bit of that had to be made and then animated, which is absolutely incredible. And some of the sets we see in that first film, we see again in the later films. Now, I gather that they rebuilt them, so they're not literally the same sets, but the original designs were carried through from film to film. So in that very first one, we see Wallace's basement or cellar, where he goes down to do all his designs and construct the rockets. And that same cellar pops up again in later films. A little bit more elaborate in the later films, but it's the same basic design. And all of the work on that first film, pretty much done by Nick Park on his own. I mean, he did have other people working with him, but he directed it, he co-wrote it, and obviously animated everything as well. And also directed the acting performance of the one voice that we hear, which is Peter Sallis, who plays the part of Wallace.
Yeah.
Do you think this first film established the characters in a sort of a strong way that they were then able to carry forward?
I think so. I mean, by the end of the first movie, we know that Wallace he's kind of a bumbling inventor. A little, I don't want to say ignorant, but not always aware of everything that's going on around him or the depths of things, and a little self-centric.
Yes. And it's more often than not that if something is going on, if there is like a kind of a B story to Wallace's A story, it's often that Gromit has noticed something that Wallace hasn't.
And Gromit is very put upon by Wallace in many ways. And so it talks about the depth of the relationship that they have for one another. And the fact that I'm talking about the depth of relationship in two plastic animated characters talks about how well those characters are developed in the various movies and shorts that have come out over the years. Even in this first effort, Wallace ends up sawing through one of his sawhorses, and then he volunteers Gromit, who happens to be the right size, to stand in for the sawhorse while he's sawing through the board the rest of the way.
Oh, and immediately after that, Wallace is sawing, and as he's sawing, there are some nails in the way. He's sawing through a piece of wood and there's some nails sticking out of something else. And in between saw motions from Wallace, there's Gromit hammering in those nails. So again, Wallace is totally oblivious to the fact that those nails are there, but they're going to cause him harm. So Gromit's instinct is to get rid of them. And just seeing that piece of animation of the saw and the hammering of the nail on these alternate strokes it's just genius.
The other one that sticks out is when Wallace makes a mistake, it's Gromit's job really to fix it. Like, so, he breaks the sawhorse, or Gromit becomes the sawhorse. They're about ready to launch. The fuse has been lit and it's burning down. And Wallace remembers that they forgot the crackers for their vacation to the cheese moon. And so who does he send? Gromit. So Gromit has to run out of the spaceship, run up the stairs from the basement, get the crackers, and get back in before it takes off.
And that sort of sums up the key plot function that Gromit has. Gromit is the one who usually solves the problem. Wallace, more often than not, causes the problem in some way, and then Gromit has to save the day.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and we should mention further, Gromit has no mouth. So all of his emotions come from the tilt of his head and the set of his eyes, which is kind of what a dog does in real life, although even a dog gets a mouth.
Yeah.
So the artistry and the communication of that is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's genius, real genius. What about my claim that this is science fiction? Would you go along with that? Or is this fantasy?
Goodness. In a classic definition, going to the moon is definitely science fiction. When you find out the moon is made out of cheese, and at the risk... So, let me take a half step back. Later this year, a book by John Scalzi is coming out, and it postulates what would happen if the moon actually turned to cheese. I think the book title is When the Moon Hits Your Eye. And Mr. Scalzi is a science fiction author. So I'm tentative, I'm hesitant to say that it's not science fiction, but if a young kid dreams of going to the moon, that's a fantasy. I don't know.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on this. I mean, ultimately, I think it doesn't matter. It's a great entertainment, and whether it's science fiction, fantasy, or what, doesn't matter to me at all. But if we're trying to pin it down, there's two things. There's the sort of the Ray Bradbury approach to science fiction, which is basically, if it's impossible, it's fantasy. But if it's possible, it's science fiction. Well, by that way of looking at things, this film, A Grand Day Out, is impossible because you can't go to the moon and eat the cheese. You really can't. So it's impossible, so it's fantasy. So to Bradbury, this would be fantasy. However, I generally go by if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. I tend to go with that approach to science fiction. And this looks like science fiction. It behaves like science fiction. Who cares whether it's really fantasy or not? It's got all of the trappings of science fiction. And if you look at the earliest pulp science fiction in American pulp science fiction magazines from the early 20th century, they were all about inventors. They were all about, because they were all modelled on Thomas Edison, essentially. So they were all about people bashing bits of metal together in their basement, waving their hands and making magical things happen, whether it be going to the moon or travelling at 500 miles an hour or what have you. So I think this is science fiction by most definitions, except for the fact that the moon is made of cheese. But hopefully Mr. Scalzi can fix that for us.
Well, yeah, I'll be interested to see on how his take on it comes out, because I love reading his work.
Yeah, yeah. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, and then I have a funny story about this.
So then we've got The Wrong Trousers, which is from 1993. And The Wrong Trousers seems like a huge step up in terms of, I suppose, budget. I mean, the first film, Grand Day Out, is lavish, but this is even more lavish. The Wrong Trousers looks like a feature film, even though it's just another short film. This one is about Wallace inventing... No, sorry, he doesn't invent. He buys from NASA some no longer required mechanical trousers, kind of exoskeleton trousers.
Yes.
And the whole idea, I think, isn't it that he wants to use it to walk Gromit? So he doesn't have to take Gromit for walks anymore. The trousers can walk and pull Gromit along on a lead behind. I think that's the motivation there.
It is.
And, of course, with hilarious consequences. But The Wrong Trousers also introduces a third character, just as the first film had this sort of vending machine robot thing on the moon. The Wrong Trousers has this penguin, and he's an absolutely stunning villain or antagonist. He just insinuates, I don't know if that's the right word, he inveigles himself into Wallace and Gromit's house and lives there as a lodger, all the while plotting to stage a heist at the local museum where there's this blue diamond on display. It sets up a three-way relationship between Wallace and Gromit and the penguin. And there's this kind of thing where Gromit twigs fairly early on that something odd is up. Gromit feels displaced by this penguin intruding on their daily life. And he soon figures that the penguin is up to something. And he kind of spies on the penguin and follows him and watches him and so on. And Wallace, of course, is totally oblivious to everything that's going on, because that's the way Wallace is. And I just think it's a fantastic relationship between the three of them, eventually with the penguin being caught. He disguises himself as a chicken by putting a rubber glove on his head.
Yeah.
And the minute he does that, people can't see him as a penguin. They say, oh, it's a chicken. Where did that chicken come from? And it's absolute genius. What was your story?
So when we started watching these with our children, we bought a DVD from the United States. And on it were the first three shorts. We're going to talk about the third one in a second. And then a whole bunch of itty-bitty little interstitial pieces called the Cracking Contraptions. But for the longest time, I did not know the true order in which these movies features were released, because on the DVD, they're in the order of A Grand Day Out. The third movie, A Close Shave, comes second, and The Wrong Trousers is last.
Interesting.
Yeah. And when I rewatched the third movie just recently, there's a callback to the second movie in it that I had never picked up on before.
Right. Yeah. And I noticed, because I watched all of these in 1 week, which I've never done before. I mean, every one of these I've seen more than once, but I've only ever watched them as one-off viewings of the individual films. But this week I watched them one after the other, and I did notice callbacks almost every single time there was a callback to one of the previous films. I wonder why they put them in a different order on the DVD. Maybe they thought The Wrong Trousers was the strongest of them, and they wanted to end with that. Or maybe it's just a mistake.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's just a mistake.
Okay.
But it was so odd, because, you think this is the end, and it's actually the middle.
Yeah. Some of the things I like about The Wrong Trousers, I think it is beautifully plotted in a way that A Grand Day Out isn't. A Grand Day Out is full of character, and it's a joy to watch. But it doesn't really have much of a plot. The Wrong Trousers, on the other hand, has kind of an A story and a B story. And even though it's only about half an hour long, it's just like a feature film. And it looks like a feature film because the cinematography is so beautiful. The production design is so beautiful. And obviously there was a lot more money available for the making of The Wrong Trousers. For the animation, what most impresses me in The Wrong Trousers is the physics of everything. So, for instance, there's a scene where Gromit is hanging from the ceiling, because he's put on these trousers which have suction cups in the feet of the trousers, so you can walk up the walls and across the ceiling. And there's Gromit hanging from the ceiling, and he's swinging, and his ears are swinging. And all of that is animated by hand. No matter how good an animator you are, how on earth do you get something that looks as if it's just swinging due to gravity? It's absolutely beautiful. There's another section where the penguin is sweating nervously.
Oh, yeah.
And you see these little rivulets of sweat running down his face. And again, how do you do that? With a real actor filming in real time for a live action film, you spray a bit of gelatin on their face and it makes them look sweaty, or a couple of drops of water strategically placed so that they run down their cheeks. But you can't do that in animation. Everything has to be animated, because otherwise all the other stuff would have to stop while you do the little live action bits. So it's beautiful. And then there's the most spectacular train chase you've ever seen in a movie, which is a little train set, the penguin riding one train, Gromit's riding another. The penguin switches the points on the track so that Gromit's train gets sent off on another track, but the track hasn't been finished. So he picks up a box of train track parts and he's laying the track out in front of him as the train proceeds down. And it's just the most astonishing piece of animation I've ever seen in my entire life. And I love animation, but the first time I saw that, I thought, this is absolutely incredible. And it's a good job that Ray Harryhausen retired, because as good as Ray Harryhausen was, there's no way he would ever have been able to do something as dynamic as the track-laying train chase from The Wrong Trousers. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. I remember there's even a point where Feathers has a pistol and he's shooting. And I want to say that you actually get a glimpse of a bullet a few times.
Oh, yeah. We should say, of course, Feathers McGraw is the penguin. I don't think I named him when I was summarizing the film.
No. And it's a beautiful call out to Superman. He puts on his glasses and no one recognizes who he is anymore. Once Feathers puts on his glove, it's the chicken. I never knew that.
Fantastic. I want to say something about the writing of the film. I don't know a huge amount about how the film was written, but I do know from the credits of The Wrong Trousers that it was co-written by Bob Baker, whose name appears in the script credits for most of the Wallace and Gromit films. Bob Baker wrote for Doctor Who for years. I think he probably wrote some Doctor Who books as well, but he certainly wrote episodes for TV. So we're talking about a writer, a well-established writer, but from a wholly different genre to this, really. There's also a credit to a friend of mine, Brian Sibley, who gets some credit to do with additional script materials or something like that. So I don't know quite what Brian contributed, but Brian, among many other things, he's an award-winning dramatist, but he also wrote the Aardman animation book. So I'm guessing that while he was spending time writing that book with Aardman, that they tapped him for some lines of dialogue or a brush up of parts of the script. I'm not really sure. I've never spoken to Brian about that, even though I've spoken to Brian about everything else he's done in his writing career. I've never asked him about that, so I must do that one day. Oh, and the other thing to say, this film, The Wrong Trousers, won the Oscar for Best Animated Short, which A Grand Day Out didn't. A Grand Day Out was nominated, but it didn't win. Do you know why it didn't win?
Let me think. It came out in 1989. I was going to say it probably lost to a Disney movie, but it's in a different category, so I don't know.
Yeah. It lost to another Nick Park film, which was Creature Comforts.
Creature Comforts?
Yeah. Nick Park
Creature
was nominated.
Comforts?
Yeah. Are you familiar with that?
It was another BBC series about animals?
Yeah, that's right. What they did is they interviewed real people who had interesting stories to tell and then turned them into animals, basically. But for the original Creature Comforts, the interview questions were all about how you live and the kind of environment you love and the things that you need around you. And then they turned them into animals and animated them. There's somebody who I think was Spanish or South American or something, and he talked about how he needs his space. I need my space. And they turned him into a kind of a mountain lion who's there in the zoo in his cage, lying on the branch of a tree and sort of gesticulating as he says, "I need my space." So that won the Oscar for Best Animated Short, causing A Grand Day Out to just be a runner-up.
Crazy.
But what an amazing start to a career, to have two of your films competing with each other for the same Oscar. It's remarkable.
Did you happen to see these when they came out, or did you experience these later in life like I did?
No, I saw them all as they came out, really. Yeah. So I just sort of witnessed them piecemeal over the years. But there was a whole load of stuff coming out from Aardman in the late 80s and the early 90s. And even before Nick Park was working with them, they were doing interview-based films, and they did some really good ones. And this was around the time that I started teaching film. So I was using their films in my lectures, because even though I didn't teach animation as such,
mm-hmm.
the script work in these films was terrific. The cinematography, the plotting, all of that, and the character design and character development. So I've been heavily influenced by these, even though they're I taught live action film, but this is from animation. They're still doing the same thing in terms of how you entertain a viewer.
Yeah, I mean, whether you do it with people or pens or plastic or pixels, you still want to do a great job telling story. And so why not use all the methods or all the media and learn from what you can?
Yeah, absolutely. Should we move on to the next film?
Yeah. The next film, or the second film, depending on if you're in the United States on looking at certain bad DVDs, is the story of Wallace's first love story, I think is the right way to talk about this, and the dangers of artificial intelligence. Yep, it's the 1995 movie A Close Shave, where Wallace, who is always struggling for money because inventors don't tend to get paid very much, and he's always coming up with interesting side businesses, and so he has come up with a window washing business, which involves Gromit being suspended from various things, ladders, bungee cords, while he's on the ground. So yeah, Gromit washes and Wallace profits. But one of the people asking them to wash their windows is the lady Wendeline, who owns the yarn shop in town, and her dog Preston, who was left to her by her husband, who recently passed on. And they're experiencing a time of real tribulation in their town because sheep are being stolen and they can't catch the person who's doing it. And it turns out the person who's doing it is Preston, who is taking the sheep and shearing them and then sending them off to a dog food factory so that Wendelin will have yarn in her shop.
That's it.
As time goes on, we begin to learn that Preston isn't quite like other dogs, like Gromit. For one, he has a mouth with teeth. And for the other one, he's a robot dog who's gone bad.
He is.
Inspired by Wallace, he makes a machine where he is going to start making all of the dog food. And it's up to Wallace and Gromit and Wendeline to try and stop him at the risk of their own lives.
Fantastic. There's a wonderful line from Wendeline. She says that Preston, he was created for good, but he turned out evil. These things just happen. Brilliant. And there's loads of these complicated machines again in this film, and this is probably the most elaborate so far in terms of these machines. What do you call them? Rube Goldberg machines, I suppose you'd call them. We also have a thing in the UK that we call them Heath Robinson machines, because there used to be an illustrator called Heath Robinson who would design these most complicated machines to do simple tasks. And again, this one has a sort of an A story and a B story. And again, we've got Gromit catching on to things before Wallace does. But for me, it didn't quite have the charm of The Wrong Trousers. I don't know how you felt about it.
So, when we watched this, my kids were young, and they were scared by Preston.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they understood that Preston was evil, but at one point, Preston falls into the machine that shears the sheep, and it's revealed that he's a robot. And he does this by literally busting out of the machine, which is constructed of metal, and so there's loud gongs, and the music is dramatic, and that was just a bit much for 3-year-old and 5-year-old kids.
Yeah. I mean, that raises the question of who are these films made for? I mean, you've clearly experienced them through your kids, so you've witnessed them as children's films. But I've only ever watched them as an adult, and actually, I've through all of my life, I've argued with people that animation is not just for kids. Because a lot of people think, it's animated, it's for kids. And they dismiss things. And I always say, well, have you seen King Kong? Have you seen Ray Harryhausen's films? Have you seen the classic Warner Brothers cartoons from the 1940s and 50s? They are astonishing pieces of filmmaking.
Yeah, even more recently, the Star Wars The Clone Wars series, which ran for 8 years in various fits and spurts.
Yeah.
Those are all directed at adults.
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, it's just a fun moment when Preston gets crushed by his own machine. But yeah, I can see that would scare the little kids.
Yeah. And I think that talks about the genius of a lot of the writing. I guess the first time I really noticed this explicitly was in the movie The Incredibles, where there's the story that you're watching, and layered above that, sometimes several layers higher, there's all these other subtle things about Mrs. Parr wondering if Bob is cheating on her, which is something that no kid would ever pick up on because of their innocence. But as adults, you look, oh yeah, boy, she must be really worried. She doesn't know that he's just off saving the world from evil robots. And the same kind of thing is happening here with the relationship. People will laugh at how Wallace treats Gromit. But when you look at the suffering that Gromit goes through because of Wallace, you look at your own relationships and say, well, hey, are people taking advantage of me? Am I being kind and aware of what I'm doing to other people?
Yeah, so they certainly work on many levels, these things. And I've noticed with the most recent one that there are so many visual in-gags, just things in the background, that I can see a lot of people will be watching these and pausing and sort of trying to figure out what something is in the background, just like you do with classic Simpsons episodes. You know, there'll be a thing that flashes by in a second and you think, what was that? So there's so many levels, and I think that's one of the things that makes these films compelling and rewatchable, because there's always something new you can find.
Yeah. The title of every book that they have to place into a bookcase, the title of every album they listen to on the record player in their van, which just is hilarious. Yeah. The names of businesses that they drive past. And I've wondered if that's part of the plotting and the storyboarding, or if that's the effort of artists that want to find it must be incredibly monotonous what they do to move things, to make precision millimeter scale movements 8 to 10 hours a day for 4 years in order to make a film like this, which is 25 or 30 minutes long.
Yes. Yeah.
I should also mention that we're introduced to a new character here. His name is Sean. He's a sheep that falls into Wallace's sheep shearer. And because he's cold, they knit him a sweater, so you can always tell Sean differently from the other sheep. But Sean was such a popular character, he got his own spin-off series.
Yes, he did, which is amazing. You know, the people making these films are so busy with their various projects, but they somehow still make time to do a spin-off of that. How on earth do they do that? There's actually, you mentioned Sean. There's an example of something which I wouldn't have thought would work in the US, because in England, not everybody, but most people's accents would not distinguish between the name Sean and the past tense of the verb. What is the verb? To shave.
Shorn.
If you say, yeah, that's it. Most of us, we would say shorn for one, and we would say that sheep has been shorn, and they sound exactly the same. But to you, in your dialect, that would be shorn and shorn, wouldn't it? Two totally different words. So did you even get that there was a pun there?
No, I didn't. I'm going to tell my boys that. They're going to laugh. Thank you.
While we're at it then, what about the character of Wendoline? Does that name mean anything to you?
No, it was just, an unusual British name.
I've not seen this referred to anywhere. I'm just making an assumption here. We have in the UK a cleaning product called Windoline, which you use to clean windows. You spray it on the window and then you polish it off. It's called Windoline. So I think calling her Wendoline is a play on the word Windoline, because of course the film is about them being window cleaners.
Right. Oh my gosh. Well, and it's a tragic story. Wendoline and Wallace fall in love, and then Wallace and Gromit have to save her from her dog Preston.
Yes.
Unfortunately, at the end of the day, after Preston's evil plots are stopped, they find out that their love is tragic and cannot be fulfilled because Wendoline is allergic to cheese.
Yeah, she hates the stuff. Fantastic. I should say The Close Shave won an Oscar again for Best Animated Short. And we then move on 10 years to the next Wallace and Gromit film, which is The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Now, this is described as the world's first vegetarian horror film. This one is about a weird and wonderful creature that is stealing and consuming all of the vegetables in the town. So all the people in the town are gearing up for this big vegetable competition where, you try and grow the biggest marrow or the best carrots or whatever. And all of these are being eaten by something, some monster, which turns out to be a giant rabbit. And the mystery is, what is this creature? Where has it come from? Well, we know that where it's come from is it's all Wallace's fault, because he's invented a machine that sort of somehow transfers consciousness between him and a rabbit for reasons I can't quite remember. But in the process, when there's a full moon, he turns into a monster rabbit, and he's oblivious to the fact that this is happening to him. And meanwhile, doesn't the rabbit hold his personality or something?
He becomes much more like Wallace, yes. They call him Hutch.
That's right. So this one won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature Film, because this is a full-length feature film. And I think for the first time in these films, we get an entire town of characters. It's not just a couple. Each one of these films is sort of added more. And when we get to this feature film, you get an entire town. Dozens of characters. You've got the vicar, you've got various neighbours. It's very extravagant in that respect. And this one, I will argue, is most definitely science fiction, because the problem of the film, i.e. the monster rabbit, is a direct consequence of Wallace's machine. So in this case, the science, the technology, kickstarts the story. This is the second time that Gromit takes to the air in a mini aeroplane, because in A Close Shave he does that.
Yes.
How he comes by the little plane is different in the two films, but he basically saves the day by becoming a pilot and gets into a dogfight with Preston. No, is it Preston? It's not Preston, is it? What's he called?
No, it's the dog
He's
from
called
Victor
Philip.
Quartermain.
Yes, Victor Quartermain's dog, who is called Philip, which is a great name. And I think this one is as beautifully brought to life as the previous films, and again has wonderful cinematography, but somehow it feels a little bit long. And I find in the sort of the final chase sequences, I did get a bit bored. I just thought it could have about 5 to 10 minutes taken out of it and still work, So it's a great film, but it's a little bit longer than it needs to be.
Yeah, it was. There are great callbacks in this film to Frankenstein, the movie Frankenstein, and the story Frankenstein, the werewolf, because of the full moon part in there. King Kong is referenced.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It's so wonderful. The machine is Wallace and Gromit's side gig for this movie is they are pest exterminators called Anti-Pesto. And they're humane. So they're capturing all the rabbits that are eating the town's vegetables before the were-rabbit comes along. And they're housing them in Wallace's basement where Gromit has to feed them. And Wallace has the idea that if he can just have them stop liking vegetables like he does, that they would be okay. And so they do a little harmless brain alteration.
And there's an antagonist, of course. There's a love interest again.
Yes.
Wallace falls in love with this lady Tottington, who's known as Totty, but she also has a suitor called Quartermain. So there's a kind of a love triangle at the heart of the film. And as usual, because Wallace is going off with Totty, Gromit feels left out. And we see this in every single film. Wallace gets drawn away to somebody or something else, and Gromit feels pushed out. And that usually helps him see the world a bit more objectively and figure out what's causing things to go wrong, and then to come up with the solution to them. I think in this case, and in most other cases, Wallace doesn't really do anything to solve the problem, does he? It's really all Gromit's doing. And then Wallace takes the credit at the end and pats Gromit on the head and tells him he's a good lad.
Yeah. It was a hugely successful film. On a budget of $30 million, it took home $192 million. It won 11 Annie Awards, including Best Animated Feature. It won the BAFTA, the Saturn, the Critics' Choice. It was nominated for a Hugo Award, but lost to Serenity when it came out.
My. Yeah.
It's a great movie.
It really is. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah. So a short 3 years later, they came out with another Wallace and Gromit movie called A Matter of Loaf and Death. And this is a little more tragic because the bakers in the city where Wallace and Gromit live are being murdered. 12 of them so far this year. And Wallace and Gromit's new side business is they are also bakers. They end up meeting and saving the life of a woman named Paella Bakewell, who was the old Bakelite girl, and her dog Fluffles. It turns out that Paella, who used to be a professional model for this flower company, had sampled so much of the wares from the flower company she had gained a lot of weight and lost her job, and in a fit of insane jealousy was now killing bakers because of what they had done to her. And again, it's only through the effort of Gromit and Fluffles that they're able to save Wallace from a dire fate.
And this one ends with something that I don't think they would have dared to do in Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Curse of the Were-Rabbit was a co-produce with DreamWorks, and according to Nick Park, they were constantly being given notes by DreamWorks about what they should and shouldn't be doing in the movie, because they were afraid that American children won't understand the film, so they had to modify things in Curse of the Were-Rabbit. But the relationship with DreamWorks was severed between these two films being made. So on A Matter of Loaf and Death, Aardman were free to do what they wanted with the film. So it ends with an explosion in Wallace's pants. That's what he calls them. He says, "Oh, me pants," revealing his butt cheeks to the world. I just can't imagine that happening if this were an American-funded studio film.
Boy, today I don't know. But back in the 2000s, yeah, it might have been a little more questionable. Although I don't think it hurt its popularity at all.
No.
And I want to say somebody got mooned in Curse of the Were-Rabbit as well, or did the mooning, so to say.
Oh yeah, there was a bit of that. So this one was nominated for an Oscar, but it didn't win. I thought, watching these sort of back-to-back, as I did, I thought this was very similar to A Close Shave. It seemed almost like a remake, but with just a different setting. But I know there's differences in the plotting, that this is kind of a serial killer kind of a setup, but it's still got many of the same dynamics as A Close Shave, which doesn't make this a bad film at all. It's a perfectly decent film, but I didn't feel that this is such a necessary part of the oeuvre, if you like.
No, I mean, you could skip it. It's very enjoyable if you like Wallace and Gromit. We liked watching it. I would definitely watch it again.
Yeah. Shall we move on to the most recent Wallace and Gromit?
Yes.
So we're now coming fully up to date, 2024. So that's 16 years between the previous one and the most recent Wallace and Gromit film. 16 years, that's a long time.
Yeah.
And it's called Vengeance, Most Fowl, and it is actually a sequel to The Wrong Trousers. I tried to write a little summary of this film, and this is what I came up with. It's a film in which a convicted felon returns after a number of years in the wilderness to terrorize an unsuspecting populace. Any resemblance to recent political shenanigans is purely coincidental. So in this one, we get the return of Feathers McGraw. He's been, at the end of The Wrong Trousers, he was sentenced to imprisonment in the zoo because he's a penguin, and he's still there at the beginning of Vengeance, Most Fowl. And he decides to wreak vengeance on Wallace and Gromit. So he escapes from the zoo in his Captain Nemo-style submarine, and he takes control of Wallace's latest invention, which is Norbot, the robotic garden gnome. Norbot's been invented so that you don't have to do your gardening. Norbot will do it for you. And that becomes their latest business venture. They rent out Norbot to people who want their gardens repaired. Unfortunately, due to a series of events that involves Gromit plugging Norbot into a computer so that Norbot can be charged, Norbot's firmware gets replaced by Feathers McGraw. And basically, he downloads the evil patch, turning Norbot into an evil thing. And Norbot creates hundreds of replicas of himself, and they all join Feathers McGraw as a kind of an army. So it's got a cast of thousands, this film. It's really extravagant once again. I should say it's a feature-length film again. We've got a new Wallace in this film. He's no longer voiced by Peter Sallis because he sadly died in 2017, but he had retired before that anyway. So we have a new Wallace, which is played by Ben Whitehead, but the voice is perfect. It's indistinguishable from the original voice. It's really perfect. I wrote down 2 lines of dialogue that just made me laugh my head off when I heard them. The first one, fairly near the beginning of the film, Wallace says to Gromit, "Tech, that's the thing, as long as it knows who's boss, of course." And in that one line, he's laying out really what this film is going to be about. It's going to be about this AI gone mad or gone evil. And then at the end of the film, Gromit hugs Norbot, and Wallace says to him, "I knew you'd embrace the technology in the end, lad."
Yes.
And this one has the Yorkshire-Lancashire border, again, that we spoke of before. And it's got a magnificent bit in it, which, to be honest, I at first I thought was a cheat, but then I rewound and watched it again, and now I think it's absolute genius. There's a switcheroo. There's 2 switcheroos in the film. There's one where Feathers has swapped the diamond for a turnip, and then later on in the film, Gromit does the same thing, turning the tables on Feathers, who's trying to get this diamond. And the first time I watched it, I came away thinking, how did Gromit switch the diamond for a turnip? When did he have the opportunity for that? And when I rewound it and played it through again, I saw exactly how that happened. And it's beautifully done. It's entirely believable. I've watched this one twice now, and I think it's a bit like watching a Steven Spielberg film. It's like watching an Indiana Jones film. It's that intricate in its kind of action filming and staging and sequences. And I think they've out-Spielberg with Vengeance Most Fowl. I think it's absolutely terrific. I think it's probably the best one of the series. And if it's not the best one of the series, then The Wrong Trousers is the best one. But this, I was really blown away by this. It's really stunning. What do you think?
It is. We don't have Netflix, and so we bought a subscription just to watch this for this podcast. And I'm very glad that we did.
Yeah.
And again, like the layering of the story I was talking about, this one is all about the dangers of technology. Wallace wants to do everything automated. It isn't good enough to pet Gromit himself. He has to invent a machine to do the petting for him because he's so busy doing other things. And the things that gets lost in that are your relationships. And I thought it was just brilliantly written that way. Yeah. I also really liked the chase scene.
Yeah.
In our first chase scene with Feathers McGraw, they're racing through Wallace's house on an electric train setup. On this one, there's a callback to the African Queen, where 2 tugboats, not even tugboats, but pleasure barges, or are going through canals or rivers at their terrifying pace of 12 miles per hour. Yeah. While Feathers is trying to get away and Wallace and Gromit are trying to catch up and stop him. It's just, it's good.
It's amazing. And the final sequence, they go across this sort of huge viaduct, and there's the thing where they close the lock gates so that the canal barges cannot carry on across the viaduct. So Feathers puts his canal boat into a kind of a skid, and it swings sideways across the viaduct, and then it's kind of teetering on the edge with Gromit dangling by his fingers. Absolutely stunning work. And I gather from watching the little behind-the-scenes featurette that nearly everything in the film is done in the traditional way, but they did use some CGI for visual effects, and also for combining some background activity with foreground activity. But you would not know it from looking at it. I think I said this last time, that they've integrated CGI in such an organic way that this looks every bit like it's the previous style of Wallace and Gromit, where everything was done by hand. To me, this is the ideal world. If you're going to have CGI, it's got to be seamless and blend in with the live action or the real stuff that was posed before the camera. Yeah, I'm just blown away by Vengeance Most Fowl. I think it works. It holds up to a second viewing, because I watched it twice in about a 3-week period, and it even holds up if you stop it and go kind of frame by frame through a scene.
Now, where did you see this behind-the-scenes featurette? Because I don't think it's been released on media yet. Is it on Netflix somehow?
No, it's on the BBC's iPlayer, which is their streaming service. It's a free catch-up streaming service that we have. So almost anything that's broadcast on BBC TV turns up on the iPlayer for subsequent viewing. And they put it on there as a little extra. During Christmas holiday period, they had all of the Wallace and Gromit product, every single film they had on the iPlayer, so it was very easy to watch all of them. I noticed the other day that Curse of the Were-Rabbit has disappeared from the iPlayer, so I guess they only had the rights for it for a limited time. And of course the BBC have had a hand in nearly all of these films. I don't think they had anything to do with A Grand Day Out, but they have been principal sort of collaborators on all of the shorts, so they've always been good friends to Wallace and Gromit.
Oh, yeah. There was something that struck me about this particular movie that I think was different from the others, and I should go back and rewatch this to be sure, but I want to say this is the first time they've had recurring characters.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yes, because we've got the policeman coming back.
Exactly. And Feathers, of course, but...
Oh, and Feathers, yes, of course, yeah. And here's another indicator of the quality of this film. Even if you've not seen The Wrong Trousers, even if you've never seen or heard of Feathers McGraw before, it's all self-contained within this one film because it gives you this kind of backstory without in any way feeling clunky. It just feels like a series of flashbacks that we're given.
Yes.
But if you have seen the earlier film, you get that extra reward of seeing those familiar characters again. So at first, when I heard they were doing Feathers McGraw for this one, I thought that they're just repeating themselves. But actually, they're not. This is another story. It's a continuation of The Wrong Trousers in one respect, but it is a whole other story, and it holds up in its own terms.
And I suspect we'll see him at least one more time.
I'm sure. I think he's very much part of the Wallace and Gromit.
Well, plus he got away with his turnip.
Oh, yes, he did. He escaped, didn't he? He escaped to Yorkshire. He crossed the border.
He did.
So, overall thoughts then on Wallace and Gromit? I mean, as I think I've made clear, stunning animation, stunning integration of complicated effects and beautiful cinematography through all of these films, I think they're enormous fun for all generations. And the older I get, the more I enjoy them. So, I don't think you can grow out of them. Maybe some people can. Maybe it's just because I'm childish. And here's an astonishing thing. If you look these films up on Rotten Tomatoes, you'll find they've got astonishing ratings.
Yeah.
Vengeance Most Fowl has got 100%. That's from the critics' view. I think the public rating is something like 93%. But nearly all of these have got 90 to 100% ratings, and several of them have got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and that doesn't just happen. And I noticed the other day that Star Trek Section 31 has something like 13% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh, that's not good.
That's not good, but all of these Wallace and Gromits, they're up there with 100 or very near to 100.
Yeah, because on my other podcast, Take Me to Your Reader, we do adapted science fiction. We've seen movies on all ends of the scale, and I think our current record is 3%. And that, I want to say that was the either the Death Race remake or the Rollerball remake.
Yeah, that sounds highly plausible.
Just bad.
Have you got any final comments on Wallace and Gromit?
Just, Brian Jakes, who wrote the Redwall series from Britain as well, the United Kingdom, was once asked whether or not he wrote kids' books, and he said no, he writes books with a great yarn.
Yeah.
And it's like you were talking about. Great storytelling transcends the medium and is approachable to all kinds of people. So if you're thinking about creating something, Just do it and do a great job of it. And all the other things will kind of take care of themselves.
Shall we move on to a quiz?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a quiz for you here, and this is a quiz inspired by Wallace and Gromit, but I admit this one is taken from the internet, so I did not devise this myself. But when I saw it, I thought, I've got to use this one. Apparently, this was a thing during the pandemic, during lockdown, but if it was a thing, it kind of passed me by. So apologies to any listeners who are already familiar with this, but we're going to play a quiz called Cheese or Motorway Services. Now, do you have motorway services? In the US, if you're driving on the freeway and you've been driving for 4 hours and you need to stop and refuel and get food and so on, what do you call that? The place where you do that?
That would be a gas station.
Okay, is there not a term for the for it overall? I mean, we call them motorway service stations or motorway service areas.
We have some truck stops.
Okay.
And a truck stop particularly caters to the long-haul truckers because they'll have places where you can nap or sleep, showers, laundry services, often a convenience store, and gasoline, a lot of pumps, room to park your truck, which is hard to come by at some gas stations.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have motorway services, which is basically you pull off the motorway, the freeway, and you park in a car park, and you can then go inside, and there's like a food court, usually. There'll be a Starbucks, there'll be a McDonald's or a Burger King, and there's usually a couple of shops as well, and there are toilets. And I think they do have showers and so on for truckers, but these are for the general public, really. So they're called motorway services. And usually they have names that sort of just reflect the place of where they are. But sometimes they have strange names. Anyway, I'm going to give you a name, and you have to guess whether it's a cheese or the name of a motorway service station.
Okay.
So here we go. The first one. First one is Broxden. 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 Cheese or motorway service?
I'm going to say motorway service.
Correct. It's on the M90, apparently. Next one, Trowell. Trowell. Trowell, or maybe Trowell.
Oh, I think I'm going 2 for 2 with motorway service.
Correct. It's on the M1. Tunworth. Cheese or motorway service?
Now, for people listening and maybe playing along, I am completely guessing most of these. So, Trumwell.
No, it's Tunworth.
I'm tempted to go cheese because I've already done 2 motorway services, but that doesn't sound like any cheese that I've heard of. I'm going to say motorway service again.
You should have stuck. It's a cheese. It's a soft cheese originating from the Duke of Wellington's estate, apparently. And I should say, nobody would recognise these as a cheese. Very few people would even recognise these as motorway service stations. So you're feeling that you don't know any of these. Most people will not know any of these, even if they're British. So next one, number 4, is Stickleton, which is Stichelton. Stickleton or Stitchelton, maybe.
Motorway service.
Nope, it's a cheese. It's an English blue cheese. Next one, Old Inns.
Old Inns.
Yep.
Cheese?
Nope, services on the M80. Next one, Bowland.
How do you spell that?
Bowland, Bowland.
Okay, so these must be English cheeses.
They all would be English cheeses if they were cheeses, yes.
If they were cheeses.
Well, I think, yeah.
Motorway service.
No, it's a cheese. It's from Lancashire, which is where Wallace and Gromit live. Cracking cheese, Gromit. Next one is Shevington. Cheving. Shevington.
Cheese.
Correct. It's a semi-soft and mould-ripened cheese. Next one, Pont Abraham.
Oh, that's a motorway service.
It is. It's on the M4. The next one, Gordano.
Gordano. That sounds like an Italian restaurant. So I'm going to go cheese.
No, it's a motorway service. It's on the M5. And the final one, Derby, which you might pronounce Derby. I don't know.
Is it Derby?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Would you say Derby?
I would say Derby. That That's a cheese.
It is a cheese. It's a mellow cow's milk cheese from Derbyshire. So there you go. I don't know how many you got there, but it's amazing that you got any at all.
I was hoping for a couple of gimmies like Wensleydale or Stilton. Or
yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, I'm afraid not. One of the Wallace and Gromit films, it must be Curse of the Were-Rabbit, when Wallace is unconscious and they need to bring him round. They stick a piece of cheese under his nose and it wakes him up. It's called Stinking Bishop, I think, that one. And now, finally, do we have any past, present, or future items to discuss?
I do. I have a past item. Well, I guess it's kind of a past or present item. 2025 is the 50th anniversary of a slew of adapted science fiction movies. Rollerball, The Stepford Wives, A Boy and His Dog, Death Race 2000, and Escape to Witch Mountain.
Yes, that was a good year.
Not as good as 1984, but not half bad.
Very good. I've got a past item, although in a way it's a present item. I recently, because I was in a book group, I recently reread The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which I've read probably about 10 times previously. But this is the first time I've read it in about 5 years, I reckon. And I reread it in a single sitting, which is exactly how I read it the first time I ever read The Time Machine, which was way back in the 1980s. But it's astonishingly good, The Time Machine. If you've never read it, go out and read it now, because it's fantastic. And of course, it kick-started science fiction. But it's a really, really good book, really holds up, and I found it a real page-turner.
Wow. For a 130-year book, that's something.
Yeah. You got any more?
Yes. This is a callback to our talk about books, but John Green, the noted YouTube person, philanthropist, and tuberculosis activist, posted a video discussing whether or not listening to audiobooks counts as reading. And I will not spoil this for you. I'll pass the link for it over to Phil, and he can throw it in our show notes, so everybody can go listen to it and see if you agree with John Green on his opinion and see what it is.
Excellent. Thank you. I've already blown my present item, which is that Star Trek Section 31 is out. This is the spin-off from Discovery, starring Michelle Yeoh as Captain Giorgio. It's got... Actually, I was wrong earlier. I said it had 13% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got 18%, so I was doing it a disservice. It's not nearly as bad as we thought.
Not good, though.
No.
I have a future item, and this is near-term future. It's next month. So hopefully this comes out in time for people to appreciate it. I'm a fan of Mary Robinette Kowal's work and John Scalzi's work. Mary Robinette's newest Lady Astronaut novel, The Faded Sky, comes out next month, and she's going to be on tour and coming to Powell's bookstore here in the Portland metropolitan area. So looking forward to getting an autograph and hearing her talk about her book.
I've got a future item as well. It's a bit self-serving, but coming up in a few days, we have the premiere for Terror Out of Space, which is the latest audio drama with pictures that I've been involved in. Last year we did The Crystal Egg by H.G. Wells. This time we've done Terror Out of Space by Lee Brackett, who we've talked about before on the podcast. This one is fully illustrated. Parts of it are slightly animated, but don't expect Wallace and Gromit style animations. But it's a very colourful piece. I've tried to make it look like because I do the visuals for these as well as the sound. I've tried to make it look a little bit like a pulp magazine, because the original story is from a 1944 Planet Stories magazine. So that's coming out in the middle of February, and we'll give you a link in the show notes.
I saw the trailer for it, and I found it very riveting.
Thank you. In the trailer, I tried to show a bit of what goes on behind the scenes, because I realised people just watching the film will think, what's this? This is just a badly animated film. And of course, that's not what it is. It's actually an audio drama, but we've put pictures to it. So in the trailer, I wanted to make that clear to people. So I show various actors doing their performance and then show the characters that they're performing on screen.
I love going to live action radio plays. Watching the performance of the voice actors and the Foley actors, I think is really wonderful. So
yeah,
I know it's additional work for you, but you might think of a behind the scenes production for this.
Oh, I know.
This new...
I know. We do our meetings over Zoom. We record the performances over Zoom. So I do have a video recording of the performances. But a long time ago, we decided that the performances generally were not very interesting because people weren't looking at their cameras. They weren't engaging with the screen or the viewer. They were looking down at their script. So the next one we do, I'm going to try and persuade people to read from the screen so that at least they're looking towards their camera, and hopefully we'll get some visual performances that we can actually use in the film itself. Whereas this most recent one, we've covered up all of the visuals of the actors and just gone with illustrations. But anyway, we'll see. Do you have any more?
No, I'm all wrapped up.
Well, I think I am too. So let's say goodbye until next time. Thanks for listening, everyone. We're Phil Nichols and Colin Cuskey, and our theme music is from Purple Planet at purpleplanet.com. Don't forget you can find us on all the usual podcast platforms. Please like, share, subscribe, and leave us a positive review on whichever platform you use. And we'll see you next time.